Okay, year 10, we're gonna do a quick review of connectives, and in order to practice using connectives, I want to make sure that all of you understand or remember complex sentence structures, because it's important that you understand the difference between a main clause and a subordinate clause. Okay, some of you this will be, or most of you this should be review, but I know there's going to be some that might be confused, and so I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Okay, this is connected to the first task for this week. On page 71 in the book, there's a red box that's called Writing Focus, and it's got a list of over 30 connectives that I'm going to have you use in your own complex sentences. So I want you to practice using some that you don't normally use, plus the ones that you're comfortable using. Okay, so you're going to write a sentence for each of them. The first thing I want to make sure you understand is complex sentences. Okay, a complex sentence is a main clause followed by a subordinate clause. And just in case you don't remember what a clause is a group of words that contains at minimum a verb, but it's normally got a subject and a verb in it. Okay, that's what a clause is. Now the difference between a main clause and a subordinate clause, okay, a group of words with a subject and verb in it, would be that the subordinate clause always includes one of these connective words or connective phrases that makes it have to be linked to something. Okay, it's an indicator that the thought is dependent on another clause. Okay, another name for a subordinate clause is a dependent clause. Okay, if you took that connective off the clause, it would be then a main clause. Okay, so let me show you an example. I will study for my exam whether I feel like it or not. Okay, so whether, you'll recognize it from the list on page 71, is one of these subordinating or connective words. So because it's whether I feel like it or not, it's a part of that clause. Okay, it makes whether I feel like it or not need another clause to be connected to for it to make sense. Okay, I will study for my exam. You could put a full stop right there and have a complete thought. If you took whether off and just said, I feel like it, I feel like it or not, could also, it's a little bit of a funny sentence, but it could manage on its own. But it's this word whether that gives the idea that they're joining two thoughts together, making one dependent on the other. A second example that I have of a complex sentence, and both these examples are a main clause followed by a subordinate clause, where the subordinate clause or that connective plus clause comes in the second half. Okay, this time I tried using the one in order to. Okay, I will study for my exam. Okay, same main clause as the first example, in order to get grades I need for university. Okay, so notice how grades I need for university. We've got subject and verb in this dependent clause, and the phrase in order to is that connective phrase that's making this second clause dependent on the first clause. Okay. Another type of complex sentence that you can right when you're practicing these would be the subordinate clause coming first, and then it's followed by a main clause, okay? One thing to notice, when you do this structure, you're going to need to use a comma, okay? The comma is used after the subordinate clause comes in the beginning. If you go back one slide, you'll notice that when the subordinate clause came at the end, I didn't use a comma, okay? In this structure, you don't need to use that punctuation, all right? When the main clause comes first, no comma. When the subordinate clause comes first, then that's when you use the comma, okay? So here's my examples. Now notice how I start then with the subordinate conjunction or connective. Okay, so the subordinate clause always starts with the connective. So that's how you can spot. If you're reading a sentence, you'll know that the sentence is the clause is the subordinate clause because it's got one of these connectives, or the way I was taught in school, they were called subordinating conjunctions. Connectives a lot easier to remember. Okay, so it starts with, unless you want to fail your reading exam, I recommend you read every day for at least 20 minutes. Okay, so the main clause is, I recommend you read every day for at least 20 minutes. That could be a sentence all by itself with the, that could be the first word and ending with a full stop, no problem. And this, unless you want to fail your reading exam, you can tell by, if you just read that and if there was a full stop here, you'd say that's not a complete thought, okay? Unless you want to fail your reading exam, okay? But if you take this word off, unless you want to fail your reading exam, not a very pleasant thought, but it could stand on its own. It's got the subject and the verb, and it could be expressing a complete thought. But this connective makes it need to be linked to a main clause. Okay, that's the main idea here. Okay, another example. As far as is another connective phrase that you can use. As far as university entrance is concerned, your IGCSE in English language needs to be one of your 5 passes. Okay, again, your IGCSE in English language needs to be one of your 5 passes is a complete thought. It's got a subject and a verb. Okay, your IGCSE is the subject, needs is the verb. Okay, and it's a complete main clause. But this, as far as university entrance is concerned, is a subordinate clause. All right. So the sentences that I want you to write, I want them to be this style of sentence, the complex sentence style, where you've got a subordinate clause that starts with the connective, okay, and then a main clause, or vice versa, where you can put the main clause first and followed by the subordinate clause. Okay, there's one other choice of complex sentence, and that's the kind where the subordinate clause is sort of sandwiched in to the main clause. Okay, and a lot of times they'll start with these shorter connectives that are at the beginning of the list. The who, when, where, which. Okay. My example is Mrs. Pringle, who teaches my English class, is determined to have A-star students. Okay, the main clause here is Mrs. Pringle is determined to have A-star students. This who teaches my English class is actually a special kind of subordinate clause that's known as a relative clause, and that's the kind that can get sort of wedged in between or in the middle of another main clause. All right, you won't be able to do this with very many of them, but it's definitely the structure that works well for the who, whom, or where or when, okay? At least where. Okay, another example I have, the school where I normally attend is closed due to the COVID-19 virus, okay? So where I normally attend is the relative subordinate clause. The school is closed due to the COVID-19 virus, that's the main clause, okay? So those are your three choices, to have your main clause come first, followed by a subordinate clause, to have a subordinate clause followed by a main clause, or your subordinate clause embedded. The other thing I want to talk about real quick in this video is the participle phrases that is reviewed in the task tip on page 71. I do want you to read the task tip box that's on page 71 that goes through all of this. It has a lot of the same material, but I want to make sure that you also understood what they were trying to say about participles, okay? They're trying to explain to you different sentence structures, and one way that you can add sentence variety to your writing and add details in, especially as we focus on summary writing, you're loading several complex sentences with lots of information. Okay. Another way you can do that is through using participle phrases. Now, if you don't know what a participle is, it is a verb form. Okay, it's the present participle is just the ing form. Okay, we're going to talk about past participle too, but just know that participle is a form of the verb. So it's always going to be a verb, but if we talk about the present participle, we're talking about the ing form, okay? Like leaving, running, working. And if you've got a past participle, that would be the form of the verb that you would use with like past perfect tense, like had written, have broken, have left, these kinds of verb forms, okay? But sometimes you can just use the participle part of the verb and use it differently instead of as a conjugated verb, conjugated main verb of the sentence. You can use them, well, like I'm using them here in these examples. Leaving for school late, he forgot his lunch once again. There I'm using it at the beginning of the sentence. Here in the second example, I'm using it in the second half of the sentence. He was weak and tired, being sick with the flu. Okay, see how I'm adding another piece of information. Instead of saying he was weak and tired, he was sick with the flu. Okay, see how that's kind of a repetitive, choppy, lots of simple sentence structures. Instead, I can add another piece of information in a different way that adds variety to my writing style. Okay. Here's some examples with the past participle used. Okay, notice how this one is written, this one is ignored. Okay, sometimes these just look like the past tense. Past participle can often look like the past tense form of a verb, and then with irregular verbs, they look a little bit different. Okay. So my two examples are written hurriedly at lunch, her homework received a low mark. Okay, this written hurriedly at lunch is describing her homework, and so we find out the information when and how it was written, and the fact that the homework received a low mark. Okay, again, I'm adding detail through this writing style of participle phrases. Ignored by her classmates, she sat alone and ate her lunch. Okay, sad sentence, but you can see that I'm adding in information using this verb form phrase before I get to my main clause, okay? And then You can also have a participle phrase that begins with a preposition. Okay, prepositions like by, after, in, on. There's loads of prepositions. If you want to know how many prepositions they are, just simply Google a list of them. There's loads of them, at least 30 in the English language. But you're still using the participle, but it's worked into more like a prepositional phrase. So here's an example. By telling the truth, he gained their trust and respect. And no, this is my main clause, he gained their trust and respect. And this participle phrase gives us another piece of detail. Okay, another example. After being alone for 4 weeks, I was grateful for any time with others. Okay, main clause and the participle phrase, participle prepositional phrase that comes at the beginning. Right? These are all ways for you to include details, express or communicate a lot of facts with a variety of sentence structures that doesn't sound listy or choppy, okay? So you want to try using these styles of sentences when you write your summaries, okay? Back to the connective list. When you write these 33 sentences, because there are 33 connectives in that list, I want you to write, the instructions I've given you are, I want the sentence at least 10 words long, okay? And I want you to, they all need to have a main clause and a subordinate clause. Otherwise, you're not using the connective correctly, okay? But one little word of warning here for the first column of words. A lot of these words are also question words. When, who, whom, whose, which, especially, yeah, these first couple. What I don't want you writing are questions, okay? That is not, it's not incorrect use of the word, okay? But it's not acting as a connective here. When is dinner? That's just being used as a question word. In order to use it as a connective, it's got to start a subordinate clause like this, okay? When I get home, I'm going to take a nap. Okay, that's using when as a connective instead of a question word. Okay, so don't send me questions. Use them as the connective that starts your subordinate clause. Okay, and again, your subordinate clause can come at the beginning or at the end, or the first half or the second half of your sentence. It's up to you. Okay, I'm gonna ask or challenge you to make sure that you use a variety. Some of your sentences should start with your subordinate clause, and then others you should try using them at the end. Okay, you'll see as you play around with them or experiment that some of the connectives will sort of lend themselves better to one or the other. But the whole point of this exercise is to get you practicing using them, especially ones that you maybe have never used before. And you look at some examples online and then try writing your own, okay? Don't look up an example and just copy the example, okay? In the instructions, I've said that your sentences need to be either about school or about being on quarantine, okay? That way I'll be pretty sure that you've written the sentence yourself. Even if you've patterned it after something else, then I want you to try creating your own sentence with the connectives, okay? All I have here, these are just the columns, the lists of connectives, and then I've done some examples for you, but I want you to do your own. Although it seemed fun, the competition turned out to be quite a challenge. As they entered the stadium, the crowd erupted into wild cheers. Okay, so I've given you an example of using although and as, and both of these I've put at the beginning of sentences. And then this is the last column. These are maybe the trickier ones, maybe the ones you don't use as often, okay? So that as if, as though, even if, even though, in order to, in order that, as long as well as soon as far as. Okay, lots of as's. So see what you can do with creating a sentence for each of these. My example is, so that everyone could participate, we waited an extra 10 minutes for the last team to arrive. All right, again, this one worked for me to put at the beginning, but chances are I could have put it at the second half. We waited an extra 10 minutes for the last team to arrive so that everyone could participate. It would work either way, okay? So, and what you can do is try maybe saying them to yourself in both using both orders and see which one flows best or that you like the sound of. Again, part of our goal is for you to have variety in your sentence writing. In exam marking schemes, you get higher marks if you've got correct, varied, effective sentences. All right, so you want to think about the best structure to communicate what you want to communicate, to include all the information you want to include, but also that shows that you've got a level of sophistication with your writing, that you can use complex sentence structures and be clear as you communicate. All right, well, good luck with your sentence writing. Obviously, if you have any questions, let me know.